Thank you, Brennan. That opening discussion sets us up very well for a great conversation with expert panelists about emerging threats. I'm joined today by an esteemed panel of guests, Jennifer Furnick, who is SVP and Global Head of Research at NCC Group, Dr. Hadis Karampur, Associate Professor, Chair in Secure and Reliable Network Engineering Systems, University of Calgary, and Kara Wolf, CEO, Amylite Analytics. Welcome, everyone. So the first question I'm going to ask of Dr. Karampur, what's one new and emerging threat or adaptation that you see emerging in the coming year?
I would say AI-powered cyber threat, or more specifically AI-generated malware, will be one of the emerging threats in the near future. And generally, compared to the conventional malware, these are basically altered version of the malware that can use intelligence to infect computer faster or deploy untraceable malicious application.
We hear a lot about AI in the press. How soon is near?
Actually, right now we are facing it actually, but maybe it's not into the in a huge extent. But I would say as we move forward with more deployment of the AI in every single aspect of every single business, we would face a lot more threat. It's not something that we didn't see right now. We're still struggling with lots of this type of AI threats, but it's getting more and more sophisticated, I would say.
Next question, maybe I'll direct it your way, Kara, as a CEO. What's the number one emerging cybersecurity priority that organizations should be focused on when it comes to cybersecurity right now?
Well, I think there's a number of issues, but I think what we're really seeing is the prevalence of a new member of the C-suite in terms of having a chief information security officer or a chief security officer at the C-suite table, as opposed to the traditional embedded security person under the IT department. So as the cyber threats get more and more sophisticated, ransomware numbers get higher and higher, we need to have security as its own corporate entity with enough governance and authority to make a difference on the business units. So taking it from an embedded situation, putting it up onto the C-suite, and having proper monetary budget allocation for a full internal capacity build.
Jennifer, have you witnessed this organizational structure?
There's definitely, I think, an emergence of the need for that role. And it's happening not just in really large enterprises or places where cybersecurity is traditionally viewed as an important role, like in banks, but even into smaller companies now. They're realizing that, these types of supply chain attacks that we see, the types of compromises of data are affecting businesses of all sizes. And especially as we start to see a lot of data-driven startups, it's increasingly important that we protect from cybersecurity threats at all levels.
That's interesting, of course, because we often think of this as a big business problem, and cybersecurity issues are hitting all companies of all sizes. So, Jennifer, I'm going to stay with you. What's the number one challenge organizations are going to need to prepare for in the next 5 years?
There's a lot of things that matter right now, but if we're thinking 5 years out, I think I would go back to exactly the work that I did in grad school, which was thinking about quantum computing. So post-quantum cryptography and the transition to post-quantum cryptography is something that we're looking at in that medium-term horizon. And since cryptography is so fundamental to the security and privacy of everything we do online, those migrations are a really big deal. So right now, fortunately, there's great cryptologic work happening where people are creating and testing algorithms that we can run on our regular computers, but that can encrypt in a way that resists attacks using quantum computers. And it's going to be in the next handful of years that those will start to be rolled out.
So something as magnanimous as quantum computing, will that be available to the masses, or will that be really restricted to a select few?
That's a great question. So the weird thing about quantum computing is it's the kind of scientific innovation where we're not going to necessarily see a New York Times headline the day that it happens. So it's likely that while these things are initially available to a select few, it will always be through this sort of cloud model. But hopefully, given the other potential applications of quantum computing, they'll be made more widely available once we're quantum safe in our cryptography as well.
It's widely believed that cyber criminals are extremely well organized and extremely well funded. So it'll be interesting to see if and when that sort of technology ever falls into their domain.
This is already happening. So there are hostile nation states that are already working in developing commercial quantum computers, and they're already working in this space and being very, very heavily funded. And we really do need to have mass amounts of funding to advance our expertise in this space from both a Canadian built and a Canadian bought perspective. So this isn't something we can ignore. This is a huge trend and it's very important. And investment in research is critical for our national security.
Is the government aware of this, and are the universities receiving the necessary funding they need for these sort of initiatives?
If I wanted to talk about Ontario, I would say that yes, it's in one of the basically near future plan from the government. They're already allocating lots of scholarship for grad students who are specifically working in AI area. So there are some sort of support. I don't say it's lots of support, but still considering compared to the other field of research, I see that more support is coming toward the research that are focused toward AI. Yes.
There are great things coming out of Canada, both Western and Eastern Canada. However, we are still competing on a global scale against the rest of the world, and we're a small country by population. So yes, great things are here. We have great researchers, we have great technologists, we have brilliant brain power here. We just need more of it. And so it needs to be better funded. We've demonstrated that we can build world-class technology and that we can punch well above our weight. And with that track record of success, we should be rewarded with more money so that we can build better and greater things.
We hear a lot about phishing scams employing social engineering to steal users' credentials account for the lion's share of successful attacks. Do you think this is a training failure or a credential management issue?
I think it's kind of both of them. For sure, a big component of protecting against phishing is employee training. We cannot ignore that. And I also think that even a simple online training is not enough. We need to have an effective training program for this purpose to make sure that all the employees are actually engaged, they are aware of the problem. And on the other side, I think the credential management is also very important because being able to understand which user are most at risk and how we can best train them, how we can best protect them, it will help us to basically have a better security plan. Right now that most of the employees actually are working from home, and I don't think it will go away anytime soon. So I would say it's a combination of both of them.
Kara, can you give your thoughts on, do you think this is still going to be an issue in 3 years from now and we'll have this solved, or is this going to continue to be a problem?
No, this is going to be continuing to be a problem. Anywhere that there's a vulnerability, it's going to be exploited. So we have trillions of sensors out there in the field and out in the workplace. They come from all over the place. Some have spyware installed, some have surveillance installed, some have backdoor malware installed. I don't think we truly understand the vulnerability that we have in these sensors, and you can't retrofit them. You know, we buy them. Some of them are super cheap. We buy them in bulk. We don't really know what's in there, and we don't really have regulations in place. So if anything, this problem is going to get worse, not better. The more connected we are, the larger the attack surface is, the more vulnerabilities we have, the easier it is to penetrate an organization.
And our other panelists, do you agree that remote and phishing schemes are going to be harder to defend against in the future?
realistically, we're all connecting over a network to another network. Whether we're doing that from home or we're doing that while traveling or from anywhere else is almost irrelevant. Like, we should assume that all networks are hostile, largely because they are, and design accordingly. And even though we've banished the idea of perimeters and things like that, there's nevertheless the need to authenticate into something privileged, and there continues to exist vulnerabilities in not only those individual products, but also the supply chains related to them.
So my next question, and Jennifer, maybe we'll build on this, cloud jacking, otherwise known as cloud account hijacking. It's tapped to emerge as one of the most prominent cybersecurity threats in the next few years. Do you see this happening now? And do you have any thoughts on how organizations can help defend against that?
This is something that we see now. This is something we've seen for at least a few years, and it's very similar in spirit to the types of things that you might see within a bank or otherwise when you look at customers, because what's happening is credential stuffing. So attackers, threat actors are harvesting credentials. People often reuse passwords and reuse usernames across different websites, and as soon as one of those is compromised, attackers are going to leverage those existing account credentials. And the scary thing about cloud account hijacking is that the systems that enterprises are deploying as we become sort of public cloud first are becoming more and more homogeneous from company to company. So as we're seeing in the public cloud, more and more enterprises are building up very similar infrastructure, very similar platforms, and thus the impact of zero-day vulnerabilities becomes much greater because the attack paths are more similar than they might have been for an on-prem model. And sometimes they're even identical across companies, which means that when these zero-day vulnerabilities do exist, we see exploitation at a much more massive scale. The time between a zero-day kind of being released and a patch being released and seeing threat actors having reverse engineered that and be exploiting it in the wild has gone from several weeks or even 2 or 3 weeks down to 3 or 4 days lately.
Addis, question for you. The IoT, Internet of Things market is likely to grow to 1.1 trillion by 2026. That means a broadening attack surface. How high should IoT be on an organization's cybersecurity radar?
Generally, the more connected IoT devices are, the more basically attack vector and more possibility for the basically hacker to target us would be available. So no matter what, if an organization is using IoT devices, they have to also think about IoT security and how high it should be on their cybersecurity radar. I would say it depends on the organization's business. Generally, critical infrastructure like healthcare, transport, energy, these basically infrastructure determine the security and well-being and resilience of an entire nation. And because of the critical nature of their activity, any disruption or any basically attack in this domain can have catastrophic damages. We have to put it in high priority if we wanted to make sure that we have a reliable and secure critical infrastructure that basically run our nations, our country. They have to decide how high it should be in their priority.
Absolutely. If I can build upon that point. So my job at NCC Group is I run the security research team, which is, hundreds of professional hackers basically that are testing networks and devices for those vulnerabilities. And what's interesting is even within our research division, we use a lot of IoT devices as projects to train our interns because we consider it so easy to find vulnerabilities on those devices. So I think that tells us something about the state of IoT security, and it is worrisome. My general advice would be not just network segmentation for IoT devices, but if you're deploying IoT devices at all across your corporate networks, you should choose devices from vendors who are trustworthy and have given a history of providing patches and updates to their devices for a long time. Whatever you will save in upfront device cost from buying cheaper, poorly maintained devices, you will pay for in the existence of unpatched zero-day vulnerabilities.
Kara, I'm going to throw the next question your way. Ransomware is getting more complicated. There are gangs potentially developing malware as a service option. How has ransomware evolved, and how do you see it evolving further?
I've seen the statistics that I've seen are quite alarming, especially since the pandemic started. 171% increase in the number of ransomware attacks. The prevalence of ransomware attacks in small and medium-sized businesses. So those smaller businesses are now being attacked. 60% of small businesses that have been hit go under. That's an alarming statistic. A number of companies are not being underwritten because they have had ransomware attacks. So that's quite an alarming thing, that you can't get cyber insurance. And then we're seeing more sophisticated attacks. We're seeing negotiation. They're either nation-state sponsored attacks, or they're criminal gangs, or they're terrorists. You don't know what they're dealing with. And some of them are so sophisticated that they're using AI to mimic the voice or the email writing of CEOs or CFOs in order to trick people or deceive people. So the trickery that we're seeing is much more sophisticated, and it's at a level that we've never seen before. We've just seen it in the movies, but it's actually here now, and I expect it to increase. And companies are having a harder and harder time recovering from these incidents. So prevention is key.
I guess for me, I think that ransomware doesn't need to evolve much further to do tremendous damage. So ransomware attacks happen most commonly on networks with unpatched vulnerabilities that may be exploited to get a foothold on the network. And the thing is, even when vendors provide patches to those vulnerabilities, it often takes a long time for downstream companies that are using those products to actually apply those patches. So until as an industry we can radically improve vulnerability triage and remediation, I think ransomware actors will continue to count their Bitcoins, and realistically, policy-based responses like government sanctions to ransomware payment operators are much more likely to have an effect.
So can someone describe what deepfake is, what it's used for, and how quickly it's advancing? Hadis, do you have a take on this?
Yeah, sure. Generally, deepfake basically refers to manipulated video or other digital representation produced by sophisticated deep learning model to replace a specific person or with another one, or a specific voice with another one in a digital media. Right now, anybody who has a computer and access to the internet and some application, they can technically produce a deepfake content. There are different good and bad use cases for this technology. If I wanted to talk about the good basically side, I would say deepfake can be used to anonymize voice or faces to protect people's privacy, for example. It can help the educator to deliver innovative lessons and more engaging lessons compared to the traditional one, because we can use this technology, this AI-generated basically media, to bring historical figures back to the life, and that makes the lecture a lot more engaging. Businesses also can take advantages of deepfake for e-commerce and advertising, or we can use it for the virtual chat environment, which will make it more natural sounding. And obviously, like any other technology, it can be also misused. So it can be used to create lots of fake news, misleading videos for different purposes, financial or other reasons as well.
So who's using it for malicious ends, and is there any way to defend against it? Maybe Jennifer, maybe you could weigh in on that.
Sure. So we experimented with some deepfakes at NCC Group, and we were actually able, using just the libraries that are available over the internet, to put a colleague of mine, his face, into a James Bond movie. And he was very proud of that. He thought he looked very cool. And while it is entertaining and there may be some positive use cases, there's certainly, we could imagine this being used and spear phishing. We could imagine this being used for misinformation, the spreading of misinformation, and information operations online, which are, of course, a salient threat to us right now and in recent years. The problem is, if you have an AI model that is learning the signatures of what makes something a deepfake, the model that is generating the deepfake will then just start to generate things that are not being detected by that detection model. So you have this back and forth that is kind of an insurmountable foundational problem to overcome, where it's like, okay, you could keep having the deepfake get better and the deepfake detection get better and back and forth, but like you don't see an end state where anyone wins. And what you end up with is more and more sophisticated deepfakes over time. So I think the capabilities that are widely available now are probably more than a threat actor even needs, and it will just get worse with time.
And I think, as we educate ourselves about, what's out there and the threat actors and the possibility of deepfakes, and we educate ourselves, and you can say, would that person really do that? A video doing something out of character for one person raises a red flag. So if you get an email with the cadence of your CEO on Friday afternoon saying, put millions of dollars into this foreign bank account, common sense prevails that this is a bogus email, right? You're going to do some checking. There's some common sense there. So some of the training needs to be, kind of around that this technology exists. This can happen. This is how you flag it. And then this is what you do if it happens.
Last question, and this is going to go out to all of you. What is the one cybersecurity mistake people will still be making 5 years from now and shouldn't be?
Honestly, it's kind of hard to pick one, but I believe there will be still lots of people that still click on links from unverified sources. So phishing scam, I think it will take lots of victims even in the future. Yeah.
Jennifer?
There's so many things that I think we'll still be doing 5 years from now, which is worrisome to say that. So I guess the most important one for me is that I think people will still be treating security as something that you do at the end of your product design, which is just wrong.
I think we're going to still see a lot of gullibility on the human side. So this starts and ends with humans. It's humans that engineer and make the malicious malware and conduct criminal activity, and it's humans that are getting tricked. So I think we're going to see the trusting nature of people diminish, which is unfortunate because you need trust in order to have good business with others.
So that brings us to a conclusion. Panel, thank you for taking the time to help unravel what companies can expect and how they can best prepare. Certainly top shelf advice, and it's easy to see why all of you were selected for your recent accomplishment and your award. It's critically important conversation as businesses attempt to come back from one of the most uncertain and to many traumatic periods in modern history. So this has been terrific advice. Thank you so much for participating. And back to you, Brennan, for the rest of the show.